Hi everyone, and welcome to today's episode of the Career Hacking Podcast. Our guest today is Christopher Johnson. You might know him as the PassionPod from Instagram. He's a podcaster, also owns a skatewear shop, and is an artist. So we've got quite a lot to talk about today. So to start off with, you want to tell us a bit about yourself, especially how you kind of opened up your own shop. That'd be really cool.
Yeah, thanks for having me on the show. This is cool. I don't know how many shows I've been on over in the UK. I'm from Wisconsin, which is like right in the center of the country, right at the top, like bordering Canada. So totally different area than where you're from. That's a long story of how I got into what I do. This April will be 10 years from the day that I opened my store. So I've been doing it a really long time. But I grew up a skateboarder. That's kind of like what I did from when I was 9 or 10 years old. And I opened my store when I was 23, and now I'm 33 and I still have it. Where to even start with that? I guess, like I said, there's so much to it, but I was always in sales. Like I always wanted to do something in that realm. I just kind of assumed I would manage a store for a company, and I kind of like climbed those corporate ladders for a while, and I sold jewelry. So I was the assistant manager of a Hellsberg Diamonds, and I worked for a K Jewelers before that. And then my last like job, I was an assistant manager for Verizon Wireless, for like, big cell phone company. And I just hated it. Like I was good at it, but it just was like soul sucking. I felt like what I was doing was making the world worse because I don't like big corporations. And I just kind of felt the need to do something that mattered to me. And I had a lot of like things happen in my life during that time frame. My parents got divorced and my dad had a heart transplant, and I had to take care of his health. And I'd gotten married and had my first child, all kind of within like a 2-year time frame. So there's a lot of things that kind of happened that made me kind of think about my life a little bit more and go, well, am I doing realistically what I actually want to be doing? And kind of came to the conclusion of like, no, not really. So what do I want to do? Well, I'd wanted to open a skate shop since I was like 14. Like that's always what I wanted to do. And then the timing just kind of like worked out. We had gotten our first free public skate park that year, or the summer before I opened, which I had been fundraising for as well. Like I was part of that fundraising for ever. I designed and printed shirts that said "Build us a park already," which I actually have one framed in my house. But I sold those when I was 15 to raise money for the skate park. So like that was my always doing that. And so when that park was finally built, we threw a big skateboard contest, me and some of the other skaters in the area, and we're kind of surprised by how many people were there. We thought there wasn't much of a skate scene at the time because there wasn't a shop or anything. And there was a lot of people, and it kind of was like one of those moments where we were all talking like, well, someone should open a skate shop now that we have a park. Like the timing's kind of right for it. And like I said, I had other things happen in my life. I had my first child where, it was like, okay, what kind of example do I want to lead? And my dad almost died and my parents split up, where it was like, okay, am I putting my energy in the right places? And I didn't feel like I was kind of just doing the thing everyone does. They look at how do you build a career that's sustainable, that like pays well and can afford a certain lifestyle. And that's what I was working towards, because that's kind of what we're all brought up to believe, at least we are in America. And I realized that the money just wasn't the important part. It was more like the impact that I was having was more important to me. So that's when I did that. And yeah, I've been doing it ever since. I mean, it's been almost 10 years now.
Do you think that if looking back, you would have ever chosen, okay, I'm going to work for a store rather than create my own just for that kind of security? Or are you glad that, or would you always make that same choice of, I'm going to open up my own shop rather than work for someone else?
I mean, it's hard. There's a lot of, the biggest challenge is not knowing when or if you're going to make any money. Like no financial stability is a hard thing for people to manage and deal with. And me too. Like that was definitely hard. Definitely made significantly less money when I quit my last job and opened my business, for that first year, especially. I don't know if I've ever made as much money as I used to make, honestly. But that's also just not really my focus ever. I make enough money to do the things that I want to do. So I don't put any more energy into making money specifically. I reinvest into what I do, or I put my energy there because that's what I care about. I don't need a bunch of expendable income because I'm already living the life that I want to live anyways. You know what I mean? Like, I don't need a bunch more vacations because I already travel a lot. So, but a lot of times it takes some kind of life event for people to kind of wake up and think about what they actually want to do. Like I said, when you're growing up, you're just like, you're a product of your environment to a certain degree. Whatever your parents are telling you to do, you know, whatever your teachers or professors are telling you what to do, whatever the people you look up to, whatever they're doing, those are the things that you envision for yourself. And owning a business, like entrepreneurship, isn't really something that schools and parents tell their kids to do. You know what I mean? Like, it's not that common. Neither of my parents owned a business. My mom was a teacher, and my dad was a marine biologist and worked for the government. And so they both had pensions, they had salary paid jobs, like paid vacation, and it was all very structured. So when I told them that I was going to quit my last job and I was going to open a skateboard shop, they thought it was kind of a bad idea. They tried to talk me out of it because they're like, that's not a real job. Like, you're not going to make real money. There's no stability to any of that. I think it's hard when you're younger to push yourself to take that kind of a risk if you don't have people encouraging you to do that, because you don't think for yourself that much yet. You know, the older you get, the more you realize you're the best person to make the decisions for your own life. But when you're younger, you're still figuring out a lot. You don't even know yourself that well yet. So how do you know that's the right move? So it's hard to say, you know, if would I do it again? Of course I would absolutely do it again. But for me, it took having those kind of like big life things happening for me to even think about doing it, because it was totally in the back of my mind. If my parents would have never split up, my dad would have never had his heart transplant, if none of that stuff would have ever happened, I probably would have stayed on the same track that I was on, because I was making good money and everything was working. You know, like, there was no issues with any of it other than the fact I didn't like it. But I also was kind of like led to believe that you're not supposed to like your job. Like, people don't, you know what I mean? When you're in school, they teach you to try, like, what can you use your skills to do to make a good living for yourself, to be able to own a home and have a family and be able to retire and all that. Like, that's what they teach you to try to achieve. They don't really have the conversation of like, what would make you happy? You know what I mean? Which I think, what I like to tell people is, if you were to win the lottery and you no longer needed money for anything at all, if money was just not an issue for you, how would you choose to spend your time? What would make you the happiest, right? Whatever that thing is, there's probably a way to make money doing that. If you're creative, there's probably a way. Say you want to travel for a living, right? There are travel bloggers. Maybe you don't get to travel all the time, but you could help, like, write or make trips for other people or whatever. Like, there's ways to be involved in that industry where it's still a job, but it's centered around the thing that you really like doing. And so that's what my whole show is about. I interview people from all different walks of life doing all kinds of different things. And the reason that I interview people from so many different demographics is to kind of show you, like, it doesn't really matter whatever your thing is that you're passionate about. There's probably a way you could build a career around it. Like I said, growing up, they don't really teach you that in schools, that you should look at what you're passionate about first. They look at what are you good at that you could make a living at. When really the question should be, what would make you happy? Okay, now that we know what makes you happy, let's figure out how you can make a living from doing that. But most people don't even consider that until, you know, something in their life forces them to think about it.
I do agree. And I think that when you're in school or like college or university, the most important thing that they focus on is what you're good at, not like if you enjoy it. It's like the subjects that you are good at, like score academically like quite high in,
Right.
or what makes you money. I think that's another big focus. It's always, does this pay well? So like at my school, the focus was always going into like STEM, or it was going to be a lawyer or a doctor, not how to run your own business and things and do something that you enjoy. And I think a lot of people lose sight of that. But I did really like that. I think, was it your last episode you interviewed someone? Was it a drone pilot?
Yeah.
And I just love the fact that it's like such a specific thing, but it's like something that people are passionate about. So how do you find guests then, and like what their passion is? Do you find people that maybe post about that, or like have an online presence? How do you find the people that you interview for your podcast?
I mean, it's definitely easier to find people who have an online presence, right? But I'll say this because I've had people before ask, like, oh, do you just interview people that have like a following or something? It's like, no, but you got to remember, if somebody has built a following on the internet, it's probably because they have an interesting story. That's why people follow them. You know what I mean? Like that, those two things kind of go hand in hand a lot of the time. So whenever I see somebody pop up through social media, if they seem interesting, typically, like if they have a following, that means their content also shows what they do for a living, and you can kind of like gather more from it. I like to interview people that have as unique of a story as possible because I want to show people that, like, regardless of what your thing is, you can make a living doing it, such as like flying drones. And that dude makes a killing. He does really well for himself, and he gets to shoot for major bands like the Killers and stuff. You know what I mean? And for casinos, he does like fly through videos. He does all kinds of like crazy stuff. A lot of times too, it'll be connections through somebody else that I know. So like I'll interview them, such as the drone guy. And after the stuff comes out, I'll ask him. His name's Jacob, and I'll say, Jacob, who else like do you know? Do you think would make for a good interview? Not necessarily another drone pilot, but like who else have you met in your lifetime that's really cool that you think would make for a good interview? Even if you can't connect me, who are they? So that way I can have like a whole list of people to contact. And I sent a lot of messages. I mean, earlier on, it was hard to get a hold of people unless I had a connection to them, like unless somebody introduced me to them. Nowadays, the show's grown enough that like I can't just message A-list celebrities and get a hold of them. It's not like that, but a lot of people do respond. So anytime I think of somebody interesting, I just message them right then. Even if I don't like have any plans to be in their area anytime soon, still I'll message them while it's like fresh in my mind and ask them if they would be open to it if I'm ever in their area. And then I keep in contact with them, and I keep a list on my phone based on the city. So like I have under like Los Angeles, I got, I don't even know, 36 people that I've asked that said they would do it if next time I'm out there, or New York, or I got like New Orleans or Austin, Texas, or like all these places. And I'll have all these people like as a backlog list of like all these people said that they would be open to doing it. Another thing too is I look at who's coming to my area. So I do partner with some local venues and stuff. The Pablo Center is like our big theater that's in town where bigger acts and stuff that come to my city perform at. And so I partner with them, and I know what their calendar is. So I know who's coming to perform and when. And so if there's somebody that is coming and I want to interview them, I work through my connections with them to get a hold of the manager of that artist or whoever that is. And if, see if they're open to doing an interview and line it up that way.
That's really cool. And I really like as well how you said that the people that you interview, so for example, Jacob, the drone pilot, that you ask them about people they know that don't necessarily do something in a similar vein, but that are interesting. Because I think that people who are, I don't know, have a bit of a unique career, or they are just a very interesting individual, I feel like they do attract people that are the same, like as in along that kind of same personality, that you're like, they do things differently, and they're the people that you want to speak to. And I think that's what I really like about your brand is the people that you interview. They've always got something really cool to say. They've got something where you want to listen because it's not the status quo. It's a bit different. And I think that's really cool. And I'm glad that you're here sharing your story on my podcast because you've got a really cool story to share as well. Like owning a skate shop, that's really cool. And then also being a podcaster and an artist as well, doing all these things. And how do you find the time to do all these different things? Are they all kind of, would you class them under like your brand, or that it's kind of one thing rolled, a lot of things rolled into one, or is it you treat them all as separate? Like, how do you manage all that in your day-to-day life?
I mean, it is definitely a juggle. Like it's hard. And since all of it is my career and I'm not doing that all as hobbies outside of my career, it makes it more possible. Right. A lot of people have to work their 40-hour job and then they're doing a podcast on the side. So it's like, well, how do you find time to do that? For me, I don't have a different job that I go to. I don't work for anybody. It's just myself. So, at this point with my store, I have somebody that runs it full time for me. So I don't have to be there day to day. I still like own it and I'm still involved. But I don't actually have to be there day to day. So it doesn't necessarily take me a ton of time, especially during the winter because there's not a whole lot happening. But I take it, based on what opportunity's there. So I painted one of the bigger murals in my area last spring. I guess I don't know how many meters it is, but it's 32 feet tall and 78 feet wide. So what's that? Approximately 10 meters high and like almost 20 meters wide, right?
Maybe I
Something like
have no idea. I work in feet, so it's okay.
that. Well, 1 meter is 3 feet. So 32 feet tall would be approximately 10 meters. But anyways, it's big, right? It's a big thing. And I painted it with a brush. Like it took a long time. But when I got contracted to do that, it's like that was a big enough dollar amount and it was a big enough project that I had to get it done in a time frame where everything else kind of had to sit on the back burner while I focused on that for that like window of time. Or when I worked with a music festival and I interviewed, like Tom from the Plain White Tees, the guy who sings "Hey There, Delilah." Like I interviewed that dude and a bunch of other people at this music festival. When this music festival was happening, they hired me to be involved in it. So I had to create their mascot for them. I painted like a 8 foot tall version, like mural of this mascot character that I made for them. And then I helped promote the event. And then I was backstage at the event, interviewing all the people who performed and then putting out all those interviews. So for that time frame, I had a contract to work with this festival. So everything else was kind of on the back burner while I focused on that. So it kind of depends on like what comes up at what point in time. But that's what keeps it fun. One thing that a lot of people don't realize is if you make a career out of something you're passionate about, sometimes it can ruin it for you. Like that's the negative side of it. If you do anything too much, you can get burnt out. And if you do something that you do just because you really love it, and all of a sudden now you have to make money from doing it, it can kill it. It can definitely kill it for you. It's not for everybody. Some people really love it. I absolutely love it. I can't imagine doing, working for anybody else ever again. But not everybody is like that. And one thing that makes me enjoy it more is the fact that I have multiple outlets. So if I'm getting burnt out from, as an example, editing on my computer for way too long, because everyone who does a podcast knows editing's not fun. Spending hours and hours cutting out clips to post on TikTok and YouTube Shorts and all of like it's not fun. The interviews are fun. But if I'm spending way too much time doing that and I'm starting to get burnt out and I'm realizing I'm not really having fun doing this right now, I can then just go and paint for the day instead. You know what I mean? So for me, it's kind of perfect. And I encourage anybody like to always have different outlets. Even if you have one main focus that takes 90% of your time, always have something else that makes you happy that's you can go do to kind of like take breaks, from time to time. One thing I wanted to address that you said before about the guests that I interview, one thing that they don't think about is when you work for yourself, a lot of people have this like idea of, oh, well, you're off on your own. They miss that camaraderie. They don't have other employees to like hang out with and bounce ideas off of. You're just like on your own, which is true to a certain degree. But how I like to think of it is all these other solo entrepreneurs like myself that I interview, I think of all of them as my coworkers because they're really my peers. My friends, my personal friends, my family, they can't really relate. They don't understand. Their career is not similar to mine in any kind of way. And it's not just the topic. It's just they work within, a system, an organization, and it's a very different lifestyle than what mine is. Versus all these people that I interview, we have that same common ground of we work for ourselves and we are creative and hardworking and figuring out a way to make that a living. It's its own like game that we're playing. But all these other people are playing the same game. They're using different subject matter. One dude's making videos using a drone versus I'm interviewing people making videos, right? But like there's still the common ground of we're both working for ourselves, trying to find clients, trying to find ways to fund it and all that. So when you have that common ground, all of a sudden you have a whole bunch of friends and you have a whole bunch of coworkers. So they're not that much different than you are because you have that central common ground. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I really like that as well because I think that does hold people back a lot from doing certain projects, which then may become their own business in the future. Like it held me back from being a podcaster for a while because I was like, I don't really know anyone else who's done this. And then I met
Yeah,
someone who I work with and he actually does it as well. And then that just got the ball rolling. So I'm like, wait, I'm not on my own because it does take a lot of time, especially if you work in a 9 to 5, which is what I do, and then you're doing this on the side. It takes a lot of time and effort because I love it. But then people don't understand if I'm like, oh, I can't go out tonight, or I don't want to do that, is because I'm editing a video. And like you say, it's not always the most fun, but sometimes it's got to be done. And then, like, oh, that rhymes. But it's true. It's like you kind of want to find those people, you want to find that community. And I think that's such an inspiring kind of way that you've put it, very eloquent. I like that word. That you're creating that community for people who are doing something that's a bit different, it's creative, and that normally would feel kind of isolating. And I think it's nice that the fact that you've done it in the form of a podcast, because then people can go and listen to that. They can, like, go to YouTube, Spotify, Apple, wherever, and then they can find that community and they can listen and feel like, okay, I'm not crazy for wanting
yeah,
to start my own business and do this, because it's very much off the beaten track. And I think that's what holds a lot of people back, is the fear. But it's
yeah,
like, well, there are ways around it. It's going to be hard, but like you say, yeah, you can feel alone, but then you don't have to, because you've got people like the people that you interview and that you meet. And I think
yeah,
that's really cool, very inspiring. I like it.
yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I forget what the saying is, but it's something like you are most like the 5 people you spend the most time with, right? So if you surround yourself with people that aren't really doing anything, you're probably not going to do anything. If you surround yourself with people that inspire you, you're going to probably do stuff, right? And that doesn't have to exclusively be people in person. It could be friends on the internet. Like that's a beautiful thing about the internet opening up, right? Is you can have friends from all over the world that do all kinds of different things. And it can even be one-sided. It can be just like creators that you follow and you watch them every single day. That person has a huge impact because they're one of the 5 people you spend the most amount of time with, even if it's just virtually watching them. Still, like if you're more intentional about surrounding yourself with those people, it'll change your mindset on everything because you see somebody else doing it. So that's what makes it possible. If you think it's not possible, it's not possible. If you do think it's possible, it is possible. One thing that I've learned from people that are successful is their mindset is never an if they can do something. It's not, I wonder if I could, open this business doing this thing. The question isn't if. It's always just how. So how am I going to do that? There is a way. I know there's a way. There's other people that have done something along these lines. I know I'm capable. It might be hard. I don't know how I'm doing it yet, but I know there is a way. So how do I do it? So if you can just switch your mindset on that, where it's not an if you can, it's just how you're going to, I think that changes the game for you.
I think it's that word as well. Yeah, I really like that. When you add that onto a sentence, I feel like it changes it. Because even if you're saying, I can't do this, if you just say, okay, I can't do this yet, it completely changes like your attitude and the way that
Yeah.
you're going to work towards it. Because it's something where instead of it being, I'm never going to achieve this, it's, I can. It just might take work and it's in the future. And I think it's changing your mindset from, this isn't possible and I can't, which I think most people have that mindset. I still do. I'm
Sure.
sure you do. I'm sure everyone I've interviewed and spoke to, they probably had that and probably still do about a lot of things. But it's keeping yourself in check and saying, actually, yes, I can. Or even sitting down with someone and having a conversation and them saying, no, you can, if you can't do it yourself. But I can imagine that's difficult as like an entrepreneur and running your own business, managing your own time. You might have those moments where you're like, I can't do all this or I can't do that. Do you have someone, whether it's family, whether it's friends, or even an online part of your community who can say, actually, yeah, you can do that, and you can go to for reassurance?
I mean, I've just always been a very self-driven person. I have a huge chip on my shoulder. I don't know if you guys use that same analogy or metaphor, but my older sister, my only sibling, she lives in New York City and she has her doctorate degree and she makes a ton of money. And her husband works in the movie industry. Um, they're very successful people. And I guess I've always like had that competition in my mind since I was a kid of like, I can be as good or successful as my sister. Like I know that I'm capable of doing it. So it's just never been a thing for me. And that's a privilege. Like my parents taught me from a young age that I could do anything. And they like kind of hammered that in my head that I could do anything that I really set my mind to. One thing that does suck about living where I live, and this happens again if your circle is small and just people around you, if you don't have anybody else that is also doing something, it can hold you back from doing anything, right? So like I don't have anybody else that's like a peer doing similar things to what I do in my area. So it's hard to continue to grow sometimes. You can get discouraged, which is why the show, just for me personally, is such a helpful tool. You know, the point obviously is to help other people. But when I interview those types of people, or all the type of people that I do interview, and I spend time with them one on one for, you know, an hour, 2 hours, however long I spend, those are the people that without them telling me that I can do it, that's what I find inspiration from. And it's more, I look at them and say, well, if they can do this thing, then I must be able to as well. Even if it's a different avenue, still, if they're able to be successful in this thing, I'm not lesser than they are. There's no reason I can't. And I think that's more what it is rather than having somebody else that encourages it.
That's a really interesting mindset, I think, to have, because it's almost, instead of seeing other people as kind of competition and things, it's more, if they can do it, I can too. And that's a
Right.
really positive way of looking at it, because I think if you're working on anything in your spare time, or if you're a small business owner, it might be the same. It probably is quite tempting to kind of fall into that comparison trap, to be like, okay, well, this person's done this, why haven't I, and almost beat yourself up. But instead of framing it that way, it's more, okay, this person's done it, so I can do it too. And I think
Right.
that's a really good mindset to have, because it's very easy, no matter like whether you're a small business owner working on a project, or even if you're trying to climb the corporate ladder and you're working in, you know, a 9 to 5 job. I think it is very easy to start comparing. And sometimes that is going to happen. I think it's a natural part of like psychology. You are going to compare yourself to other people, but it doesn't
Right.
have to be negative. It can be, like you say, if they've done this, then I can do that too. You know, you can use it as inspiration rather than to be like, well, why haven't I done it? You know, you don't want
Yeah.
to compare yourself at like, I think I'm on month 4 of podcasting, maybe month 5 of podcasting. I can't compare myself to other people. I can look at them and say, okay, one day I want to be like that, and take that as an inspiration, like your podcast, for example, and be like, yeah, one day I want to help this many people. But like, you can't compare at different parts of the journey. But I did like the way that you phrase that. That's a really interesting way to look at it.
Yeah, it's all mindset, right? You just have to shift that mindset on, like I said, what's possible. And yeah, comparing yourself to others, what is the saying? It's like comparison is the thief of joy or something. Like if you compare yourself to other people and like beat yourself down for not, you know, achieving what they've achieved, or not being as good as them, or not being as attractive as them, or not making as much money as them, like in that kind of way, it's definitely defeating. So you don't want to compare yourself in that kind of way, because then you're looking at yourself as lesser. The big part is looking at it and saying like, well, everyone has an equal base value. All people are just other humans, right? This person, just because they're really good at this thing doesn't mean they're better than I am. Just because they're more established in this thing that I want to be established in doesn't mean they're better than I am. It means they worked harder on that thing for a period of time, but doesn't make them better. So if I'm just as good as that person and they did it, I just need to figure out how to do it as well. And they're a perfect example to look at and say, okay, well, if I follow similar steps to that person, I could also get to that place. You know? So like I said, it's just a mindset. It's all just about switching your mindset on those things. If you work hard towards a thing that you're trying to do, if you work hard enough and you're resourceful, it will work out. It's just a matter of time. Like I said, it's not a matter of if, it's just how, when, you know, it just takes time to get there, but you will get there if you just continue to do it. And that's why it's so important to do things that you really care about, right? Because it's not about the financial gain. So even if you're not making money on those things and you're not hitting a progress at the like speed that you want to see, you can still see progress towards it. And regardless, you enjoy what you're doing anyway. So even if you're not seeing progress for a period of time, if you hit a slump, you're still enjoying what you're doing. Like that should be good enough anyways, right?
I think it's finding that satisfaction from things other than, yeah, it's okay to be like, oh, I made X amount of money this year, and that can boost your ego or that can fuel like your confidence on things. But I think it's more relying on something that's steadier, which is if you enjoy something and you continue to do it, then that's going to give you a lot of fulfillment rather than, oh, if I make this much money, because you're just going to end up moving the goalpost to be, if I make this much money this year, I'll be happy. But are you actually happy when you reach that, or do you want to just hit the next point? But if you're doing something you find fulfilling and like happy every day, I think that it kind of, that's the purpose for me of life, is you want to do things that are fulfilling, and you can get it from a lot of different like sources. So yeah, it can come from earning X amount of money, because that is great, or getting a certain job title. But I think it's more the smaller things that people forget, where it's like, what are you actually doing every day that's making you happy? And
Yeah.
your job is a big part of that, or like what
Yeah.
you do day to
Money's
day.
just a tool, right? Like money is just a tool. People just have to change their like concept of money. Money's just paper, or even less. It's just a number on a screen. It doesn't mean anything. Nobody actually wants money. That's like the huge misconception. Nobody actually wants money. Nobody. I don't care who you are. You don't want money. You want what money can get you. So that could be status. That could be a certain car. That could be, you know, security within your lifestyle. It could be going on a trip. It could be clothing. There's a million things, but you don't want money. You just want what money can get you, right? But there's a lot of ways to get what those things are. So if you figure out what do you actually want money for, okay, now you know what that thing is. There's probably other ways to get there that don't require money or don't require as much money. You just have to change that. People just focus on getting the money first, and they think that that's going to like change everything for them. And that's not really what it's going to be. I've talked to some people, where it's like, and even people who own their own business that are growing too fast, right? Where all of a sudden they're hiring a whole staff and they're no longer at their place of business anymore. And they're doing all this stuff because they can make more money doing that. And I have to have that conversation with them of like, but you didn't get into this business for the money to begin with. And now that you're making more money and managing all these people, you're not doing the thing that you set out to do anymore. Now you're just managing people again, which is what you were doing at your job before. So really, what's the difference, right? Because they get set up in that trap of like, well, I should always continue to grow. It's not about like furthering your career in a status way. It's just about trying to figure out how can you make a living doing something that makes you happy, which what makes you happy is different for everybody. But there's totally different ways to do it. If you want to say you want to travel a lot, it doesn't mean that you have to make enough money to travel a lot. Like that's not necessarily the case. I went to Puerto Rico. I don't know if you know where Puerto Rico is, but it's an island kind of off of like Mexico. I went to Puerto Rico last winter for 2 weeks for free because I got hired to paint a mural down there. Right? Now, did I really make any money? No. But what would I have wanted the money to do? I would have wanted the money to take a vacation to an island during the winter to get away. Like that's what I would have wanted money for in the first place. But instead, I found a way to do that without actually spending any money. I didn't make any money, but I also didn't spend any money, and I still achieved the same thing that it would have been if I would have spent the money in the first place. So there's just more ways to get to that thing if you switch the focus away from the money and put the focus on what are the goals that you have, because it's probably not the money itself, it's just whatever the money was going to get you.
That's so true. And I love that you went to Puerto Rico and you're like, okay, I would have spent the money on that anyway, but you got the trip for free. So that's so cool, because it's like, okay, you're making your job work for you. Essentially, you're getting things out of it that aren't just going to be financial. And I bet you had an amazing time there as well. Like, how was that when you travel for work? How do you find that? Do you find it enjoyable? Do you find any of it stressful? Or
I mean, it depends. With what I do, if I'm getting hired, again, I'm not working for another company. It's just me. So if somebody's hiring me, they know what they're getting because everything I do is right there on the internet. Like, you know what to expect. So I don't have this like expectation put on myself that's unrealistic. So for that one, it was great though. I mean, I even got to bring a friend of mine because they wanted their Airbnb painted, like the outside with this big like underwater kind of scene. And so I told him, I'm like, well, if I'm not going to walk away from this with like a decent paycheck for the work, then I'm going on vacation. So here's my stipulations. I will paint for 4 hours a day and I'm bringing someone with me. And they're like, yeah, sure, no problem. Because they were getting a deal on it. So I brought another artist friend of mine that we paint murals together. And I just hit him up and I was like, dude, you want to go on a free vacation to Puerto Rico? And he was like, yeah. I was like, we got to paint 4 hours a day. That's it. And we're not going to get paid, but we're going on a bros trip out to Puerto Rico for 2 weeks. And he was like, yes, absolutely, 100% down. So it was awesome. Like we would paint a couple hours in the morning while we drank coffee. The whole like middle part of the day from 10 a.m. until 6 p.m. We'd go travel around the island, go hike through the jungle, or go to the beach, or do whatever we wanted to do with the majority of the day. And then the last couple hours of the day, winding down, we'd paint a little bit more. So I had a nice balance with that one, but it's always case by case. It depends on the situation. But I very intentionally, like, my career and my life are very intertwined. Everything that I do, I don't do a whole lot that doesn't have anything to do with my career. It's usually somewhat connected in some kind of way. When I travel, I usually do an interview, or I paint something or whatever. But that's because that's what I do for a career is what I would do for free if I didn't have to make money anyways. So I want to be doing that. You know what I mean?
That's an interesting take on work-life balance because I don't think I've heard that before. In that a lot of what you do is always intertwined with your life and your career, but it seems
Yeah.
as if it actually works better that way because your career is I'm traveling, I'm doing things I like, I'm talking to new people. But that is an interesting take because
Yeah.
they are so intertwined. And actually, maybe that is the secret then to
Yeah.
happiness is actually make them more like closer together than having that separation, having that divide.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
I think
definitely
it's
something
awesome.
to think about.
Like I said, that's kind of the point of the show of mine anyways, is to show people that regardless of what it is that makes you happy, there's a way you can make a living doing it. I'm not saying that there isn't going to be anything involved with your job that you don't like. There's going to be some parts of it that aren't your favorite. And that's why it's a job. There's always going to be certain parts of it. But how can you minimize the amount of time or minimize the amount of time that you're spending doing things that you don't like doing? You know what I mean? And it's by incorporating the things you do like doing to be your job rather than 40 hours a week clocking in, doing something you hate to be able to pay for your lifestyle outside of work. It's like, how can you enjoy your time 90% of the time? And then only a small amount, maybe 5 hours a week, you have to do the parts of the job you don't want to do. But the rest of it is doing stuff that you want to do. There's ways to do it. And sometimes, all times, it'll take a little while to build up to that, right? Again, it's like looking at goals. So when I first started doing the show, I thought it would go somewhere. Like that was the intent for sure. But I didn't know it was going to go to exactly where it is now. And I wasn't getting paid to do anything at the beginning. Like for a good while, I wasn't getting paid by sponsors to do stuff. I wasn't getting paid to interview people, and I wasn't even interviewing people that I was necessarily a huge fan of. I liked their story, but I wasn't like crazy excited about doing it. But it was all because I was building towards something, you know? Versus now, I get to work with a bunch of the brands that like I promoted them before they paid me because I like their stuff anyways. You know what I mean? Like the coffee brand that I am sponsored by or whatever, or the beer company that I work with. Like they're just my friends that I would promote regardless. And then the people I'm interviewing now, I get to interview people that I'm a personal fan of all the time, which is awesome. And I'm making money interviewing people that I want to do. Like I went to see this rapper singer named Sunreal. It's Sonreal. He was my number one stream artist on Spotify last year. Like I've been a big fan of his forever. He's from Canada. And he went on tour for the first time in a few years, and he was coming through the Midwest, coming through my area. And when he posted it to his Instagram, I DM'd him and I was like, yo, what's the chances you do an interview when you come through Minneapolis? And I kind of name dropped some other people I've interviewed and told him a little bit about my story. And he was like, oh yeah, for sure. Absolutely. It's like sick. So when he came to town, a few months later, I met him at the venue at like 3 o'clock or so in the afternoon. We ended up walking into the venue at the same time. Set up cameras. I interviewed him backstage in the green room. And then after we were done with the interview, he's like, oh, what are you doing the rest of the day? And I was like, I don't know. He goes, you should stay. I said, Yeah, for sure. So I stayed the whole rest of the night. I didn't leave till like midnight. And I was in the green room with him. I ended up doing a short interview with his opener out in their tour van and like hung out the whole night kicking it with this dude. Had like the best time ever. And I I look at that and I'm like, man, all these people that are huge fans of this guy would dream of this opportunity to be able to like hang out with them one on one basically for like 8 hours and have literally one on one for a solid hour to ask them anything they want to make content together and like do the whole thing. People would pay a lot of money to do that with this person. And I just got paid to do that. Like that's about as awesome as it gets. You know what I mean?
That's mad. That's so cool. Like the fact that one that you got to do that, but then you're also like, yeah, and you were the one that got paid to do that as well. And
Right.
like, wow, that is so cool. That is, I think
Yeah.
that's like hitting the top tier right there, being like, okay, this guy is number one on my Spotify Wrapped, and I met
Yeah.
him and I interviewed him, and that was my job. Like, that is so cool.
Yeah, and that's what you can work up to. You know what I mean? Like I said, it's like if you set your goals on what is it that you want to achieve, where do you want to get with it? And it wasn't money. You know what I mean? It's I wanted to interview people that I had fun, like that I enjoyed interviewing and travel and do all those things. It wasn't the money part that mattered to me specifically. So I ended up being able to do something and I didn't make a ton of money off it, but I didn't spend any money to be able to do something that I would have otherwise spent a lot of money to do because I really wanted to do that. Or like going to these music festivals I work with and stuff too. People will spend a lot of money to go to a music festival for a whole weekend and they'll take off from work, vacation days and all that. And instead, I'm there backstage with all the artists and I'm getting paid to do it. And I would have wanted to do it anyways. You know what I mean? And those are the types of things you can get to if you like know what you're trying to achieve and you're willing to be patient and work towards doing those things. And you'll get there. It just takes time, right? You know, looking at podcasts as an example, there are so many podcasts. It's like a drastically oversaturated market. There's hundreds of thousands of them probably at this point. There's so many. But, you know, you look at everyone that's at the base level that has been doing it for 3 months, right? Whatever that number is. Let's say there's 100,000 people that do it for 3 months. When you hit the 6 month time frame, how many people are left? Less than half. Now all of a sudden you're at 30,000 people. Now, when you make it to a year, less than half of that. Now you're at 10,000 people. When you make it to 2 years, less than half of that. Now you're at 4,000 people. And I'm just making these numbers up, but that is like the how it works. It's like a exponential thing like that. So if you keep working on it, eventually you'll get to that point. It's just everybody else gives up. That's what sets you apart is being able to work harder and for longer than everybody else. When you hit a wall of like, man, I don't know if this is fun anymore. This is hard. I'm not making money. If you just like keep pushing when everybody else dropped off, you're going to continue to succeed. Look at the biggest podcast in the world is Joe Rogan, right? That dude's done like 2,000 some episodes. How many podcasts do you know have done over 2,000 episodes? I can't think of a single one, right?
No, the only one I can think of who's it's not even that as many as Joe Rogan, but in the
Right,
UK equivalent of the goat of podcasting is going to be probably Stephen Bartlett and Diary of a CEO, and he's done hundreds. He'll have done
right. But
hundreds.
that's
Yeah,
what I'm saying, though, right? If you look at their first 3 months, 5 months, 6 months of podcasting, nobody cared about what they were doing because they didn't establish themselves. So, were they actually that much better at it than anybody else? Or did they just work harder and longer at it than everybody else? Probably the latter, right? So, if you just keep going on this thing and you outlast everybody, the skills and all that stuff will come with it. You know, people think they just get lucky. Luck comes to the prepared. Like that's what happens 99% of the time. If you keep doing what you're doing, you will naturally get better at it over time. You'll slowly build more of an audience, and eventually something will pop. You'll go viral on something, or you'll be in the right place at the right time to be able to interview this person or whatever. And then you'll get a little jump, and then it'll keep going, keep going, keep going. When you get to the point where you've been doing it however many years, nobody else around you would have been doing it that long. Nobody else would be as established as you are. And that's when those opportunities start to come. When I started my podcast, I was one of a whole bunch of them in my area. And I've been doing it 4.5 years now. I'm the only one in my area that has been doing it anywhere near as long as I have at this point. So now I don't have anyone that's like direct competition just because I kept doing it longer. Not even that I was necessarily better. I got better because I did it for longer as well. Like it kind of went hand in hand, but really it was just outlasting them. And that'll happen with almost anything. If you paint for more years than somebody else, you're probably going to get better at them too. You know what I mean? It's like any of those types of things. You just have to keep doing.
That's so true. And I think as well, like, that's the key, is it's going to be commitment over, okay, you want to just get started with something and carry on doing it, rather than, okay, I'm going to put it off until it's perfect. Because it's just never going to be perfect. It's going to take practice, and it's going to take working at it and everything else. And it's going to take that kind of almost, I want to say grit, and maybe like resilience as well, to just keep going. Because even with podcasting, as fun as it can be, like, I think there's certain aspects of it, and this will be with a lot of different things, not just podcasting, but with certain aspects, I think you've got like the editing, it takes time. It takes a lot of effort sometimes to find the guests, find people to come on. If you've not got that influx of people DMing you or, saying, oh, I love your content, things like that. It can be difficult with all aspects of it. And as fun as it is, it's the difficulty is keeping it up and keeping it going, keeping that momentum, and being like, okay, right, you've made a promise to people that I'm going to post. Like, for example, with me, it's like twice a month if I can, once a month if it was like, I think around Christmas when I couldn't get 2 episodes out. So it's like,
Sure.
you've made a promise to those people, so you've got to commit to that too.
Yeah. Well, I mean, with anything, it's like, again, if you're trying to do it professionally, there is going to be parts of it that you don't want to do for any number of reasons for any period of time. You know what I mean? It's not all sunshine and roses with everything. It's just not realistic or how it works. The key is like, how can I enjoy what I'm doing the vast majority of the time and more than anything else that I was doing? Nobody's happy all the time. That's not a thing. It doesn't work that way. There's always going to be times where you're down, where something feels more difficult than it should be, where you're hitting resistance and going, things just aren't working as smoothly as they used to or whatever. But that's all kind of part of the journey. And you wouldn't enjoy the moments where you're happier, where the successes come. You wouldn't enjoy those as much if they came easy either. It's just kind of all part of it. But again, it's just the people who work harder for longer that succeed. And that's in everything. You know what I mean? If you're actually doing your best in that, whatever that moment is, which your best isn't perfect, and your best today isn't going to be as good as your best tomorrow, which isn't going to be as good as your best a month from now. But if you are doing your best in whatever that thing is, and you continue to do that, you will see progression. It's not always going to be like a straight line up. It'll be a stock market kind of a situation, but it will see progression. I try to tell people, like, whatever you're working on, always compare yourself to yourself, but from a year ago. You can't do it in a short time frame. You can't go, well, in the last month, I haven't seen a growth in numbers, right? It's too short a time frame. If you look at whatever thing is that you're working on, whether it's art or if it's podcasting or if it's, woodworking, whatever the thing is, if you look at where you were a year ago until now, then you for sure will see progression with it. And then you can decide, like, okay, well, what made this progression go the best? Like, what practices were the most efficient time for, use of my time or whatever. But always look at it from a year time frame or something like longer than that. Then you'll see the growth, which will be a lot more encouraging than if you look at it on a macro scale. Because day to day, you'll have setbacks. It doesn't throw away everything that you built to that point. It was just a setback in that little time frame. But something else will come up fairly shortly that'll pop you up to a new all-time high again.
I like that, yeah, because I do think that growth isn't consistent. Like, if you were to pinpoint it on a graph, like you said, if you looked at it day by day, it'd be up and down. If you looked at it on a month or like even a weekly scale, again, it'd be up and down. But it's like that course of over 6 months, over a year, it does build up, but it's not going to be consistently like progressing every day, as in something great's going to happen every single day. And I think those challenges are what help you grow. So when you have the day where you're like, right, everything is kicking me while I'm down today, and it's not your day. The fact that you get through that and that you overcome all those challenges, whether that's, I've had a really long day at work, I've had a hard day at work, and then you've still got a million things to do, or you're like, okay, I've got to edit this video and I've got to do this, I've got to do that. But once that day's over, or even the next day, you're going to feel so much better because you've overcame all that, you've done all those challenges. And that's what leads to growth as well, because the next time that comes along, you're going to be prepared. You can trust your future self to be like, I can handle this. Like, I can handle my shit. Like, I can do it all. And I think that's where it comes from for me, is growth comes from both. Yeah, opportunities and amazing things, but also challenges. You need both of them. And I think a lot of people don't like the challenges side of it.
Yeah, but if you don't have those challenges, you're not going to be ready when the opportunities come because you won't know how to problem solve, right? It's like I always tell people, and I've heard this from a lot of people, it's like you want to fail as much as possible early on. When the failures aren't as big of a deal, when they're easier things to fix, you want to fail. You want to have all these setbacks because these setbacks, whatever the thing is, will happen to you eventually. Everybody hits the same like setbacks and walls throughout their journey. Everyone does because they're the same problems that come up with somebody. They have something happen in their personal life that makes it harder to commit the time, or they have any number of things, financial things got in the way, whatever. There's a million things, but as you have those challenges come up and you learn how to navigate them in the future, it's so much easier when they pop up that they're not an issue. And then when you do have the right opportunity come up, you're actually prepared for it and you're not going to blow it. Like I had issues, and everyone does when they do podcasts as an example, where a video file gets corrupted, right? Like something didn't save right. Oh, it didn't actually capture the audio from the entire interview and that whole thing is thrown away, right? Like that happens all the time to people. You want that to happen. It's discouraging when it does, but you want that to happen because it's inevitable. It will happen to you. If it happens earlier on, when it's not as big of a deal, there wasn't money involved, you didn't fly somewhere for this interview, you know what I mean? You now can learn how to make sure that doesn't happen anymore. You know what caused it, and you know how to prevent that from happening. So those issues don't occur. Because if that never happened to you and it was all success all the time, you're going to get this awesome opportunity at some point, and then you're going to blow it when that opportunity comes up because you weren't prepared for it yet. You have to get to that point. You have to earn that point. There's a reason people are where they are. You may not see the entire story of how they earned it and you think they just got lucky, but that's not, very, very rarely is that the case. You just don't know the whole story. Like they just worked harder than you. Stop being jealous of somebody that's more successful. They put in the time, the energy they learned. You don't know all the hours they put into that thing. You only saw the thing that popped off. Just use it as inspiration again and look at it and say, well, if they did it, then I'm sure I can too. I just have to keep doing this thing. Like it'll happen. It's just you have to earn that thing. And when you do something or you want to do something for a living that you care about that most people do as a hobby, you have to do it better than all those people who do it as a hobby. If you want to make it a living, you have to be better than all of them at doing it, which means you have to work harder than all of them at doing it for a longer period of time. And eventually you will get there, but it's not easy to do. If it was easy, everyone would be doing that. There's a reason people do jobs that they hate for money, because that was the easiest thing to them. Was it like, as far as like, that was what was right in front of them, that was guaranteed. People get paid a lot of money to do jobs that nobody else wants to do or nobody else can do. One or the other. Most of the time it's because other people don't really want to do those jobs. That's why they're doing it, and that's why they're getting paid as much as they are doing that. And it's not even necessarily just the job itself, but it's the journey to get to that position or whatever. But that's why they're getting paid. Nobody gets paid for the jobs that everyone wants to do, right? Because everyone else is already doing it. So you have to go into it with this understanding that it's going to be a long time before I build this up to be something where I'm more professional and better at this than everybody else that does it for a hobby. Look at like photography. It's hard to make a living doing photography because so many people do it for free. Right? Doesn't mean you can't do it, but you have to put in all of that time to get there. Now, the key is if it's something you are passionate about and you just like doing it anyways, like I said, regardless of money, if you just really like doing it, you're going to be motivated and want to do it anyways. And eventually you'll get to a point where you're so good at it that financial opportunities come along with it. And it's like, oh, hell yeah, finally, I got to this point. But that wasn't the goal. Like that wasn't always the point of just making money. It was just, I want to be doing this thing. And now the fact that I make money doing it allows me to do this thing even more. It's not I can make money by doing it. It's, I can do this like more, I can continue to do this more and more. And what it affords me is to be able to continue to do it even more yet. And that's what I'm happy about. That's what I'm achieving, is the freedom to continue to do this thing. Not that I have to for money.
I think that there is what I think makes you stand out in this interview compared to maybe some of the other people I've interviewed. because everyone seems to be doing it, especially small business owners or just anyone I talk to through networking. Everyone's doing it because it's something that they love. But I think that's where you're standing out, is because it's not all about the money. It's not all about, okay, I can achieve this level of success that this founder has before me. It's, and you might have those inspirations as well, but it seems very much like, okay, this is my life. I'm in control of what I want to do and how I want to live it. And I think that's a really great attitude to have. Like, the whole interview as well, by the way, amazing, very inspiring, especially with the attitude of like, okay, this is what I'm doing and this is how I'm going to get there. This is what I've done and I'm proud of it. The fact that it's very much like, it's so different to what we're taught, as in you've intertwined your work with your life, like your career, and that like life balance is very different to what we're taught we should have, as in, your holidays should be separate to work, like it should be. It's like you get your vacation days and they are completely separate. Actually, no, you've flipped that on its head. It's like, no, I'm going for a holiday, but I'm working, and that you've took a friend with you. And I think that perspective change is what a lot of people really need to have. And just to bring it back as well to how you should make mistakes early on and like fail as early as you can when there's less risk or kind of consequence, I suppose. With
Right.
my first podcast episode that I recorded, shout out to Ben. It was actually the second one I uploaded. It took me weeks to edit, and it was not necessarily a fault of mine. I think it was my phone and then also my iPad that I was trying to upload on at the time. So the file got corrupted, the audio didn't work. I had no idea what I was doing. And then by the time I recorded my second episode, it was miles better and the whole process was smoother. And then I managed to fix the file, so I know how to do that for next time, which is great. But I think it just shows, like, with podcasting, it's a great way to, kind of highlight that example of each episode you'll learn something new, whether it's a new skill for like editing, a new software, or even just something about yourself, like, okay, I didn't know how to do that last time, but I know how to do it now. So I think that is such a good way of kind of describing, you've got to make those mistakes in order to grow, but it's hard. But once you've made those mistakes, even with life, like the more mistakes that you make, you realize actually none of it's that bad. It's okay. Everyone makes mistakes. It's okay to fail. And I think that's a really important lesson to learn as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And you got to remember too, like, nobody cares about your life as much as you think they do. Like, people sit there and they're like, oh, but people are going to judge me if I do this thing, right? Nobody cares. Nobody's thinking about you. They aren't. Like, your parents and everybody else that you think, like, in your mind, oh, if I do this, I'm going to disappoint them. You build it up in your mind to think that they're sitting there dwelling on this, thinking about you. If you could like snap into their brain right now, you'd realize they're thinking about what they're going to eat tonight. They don't give a shit. They're not thinking about you in that moment. Doesn't mean they don't love you. It's just you're not the front thing they think about all day long. It's your life. You're the only one who actually has to be in it. They don't. And anyone who actually loves you just wants to see you be happy, really. That's all it takes. They just don't understand that this thing you want to do could make you happy. They think it's going to be a struggle or whatever. So that's why they're not supportive. But it doesn't mean, like, your life is only yours to live. So you need to do what makes you happy, not what makes anybody else happy. Because whatever you do that you think is going to make other people happy, they're only going to be happy for you in that moment that you're having that conversation. And then you're not going to be on their mind the whole rest of the day or the next day or the next day until they talk to you again anyways. So there's no point in living your life to try to appease other people, because other people don't care that much what you're doing with your time. You put too much value on it when you listen to them and they give you advice or whatever, but that's just a tiny little snapshot of time that they're even thinking about you. So don't put weight on that. Don't do things don't live your life in a way that pleases other people, because they don't really care that much what you're doing. It's only you that actually has to live with it all the time. So do whatever makes you happy. The people who care about you, if they see you happy, they're going to support it anyways. It may take them a little bit of time to come around, but they will in time. If they actually do genuinely care about you, they will come around. And if they don't come around, it's because they don't care about you and they don't belong in your life anyway.
That's really true. And I've really appreciated this entire interview and everything that you said. I think there's been such like amazing advice that's like really well thought out, and you can tell it's just genuine, that it's like got a lived in experience behind it. And I think a lot of people will find this really useful. So I just want to say a massive thank you for like coming on the podcast and taking the time to do this interview. So yeah, is there anything else that you want to add before we wrap up?
Man, no, just do something that you want to do. Like I said, live your life the way that you want to live it. If you're doing your best in any given moment, you'll see progression throughout time towards whatever that thing is. And it's okay if whatever it is that you want to chase changes. People's goals and what they enjoy changes throughout time too. You don't have to be stuck in this thing. If you start on one path and that's really what you wanted to do, and all of a sudden that path takes a turn, it's okay. Go with what makes you happy, with what you want to do, what yourself today wants for goals isn't necessarily what yourself a year ago when you started wants, and that's okay. People change. There's no reason you can't do that. So go with whatever makes you happy. It's your own life. What you do doesn't affect me much. What I do doesn't affect you much. So do whatever makes you happy. If people want to find me, it's easy to find me. I'm sure you'll have the little connections there anyways, but it's just PassionPod everywhere. You can find me on YouTube, and you can find me on Instagram is the main platform. It's just PassionPod. But if you just like Google that, you'll find me on every platform, everywhere. You'll find art or anything else. I do read my DMs, so if anybody has a question about it, whatever, they can definitely shoot me a message, and I'll see it. If it's not that day, I'll message them back within a few days anyway.
No worries. Well, what I'll do is I'll pop all the links below. So if you're watching on YouTube, they'll all be down below. Spotify, Apple, anywhere else. I'll make sure that you can find Chris and his podcast, because it's amazing. So make sure to give it a listen. If you enjoyed listening today, please feel free to DM me, interact with the content, comment, subscribe, follow, whichever platform you're on, if you want to hear more interviews like this. So thank you very much for listening. Right, I'm just making sure that that's stopped recording and it's going to finish uploading.
Cool. Yeah, I've done one